And then Cambridge was nice enough to host me here, so I could
Very nice.
do my tapings here. So yeah. Yes. Welcome to Behind the Pages. We are honored today to have Bernice McFadden with us. Bernice is the author of 9 very successful novels. She was a finalist for the NAACP Image Award. She's won literary acclaim for her work. And she's here today to talk about the Book of Harlan. This is a novel, basically a family saga, centering around a young man growing up in Harlem in the mid-1900s. This is a man who is struggling to be a success as a musician, but he's basically struggling against himself and needing the discipline to follow his dreams. His career takes him to Paris, France, during the just before, as the Nazis are occupying it. He gets arrested and sent to a concentration camp where his struggles become life and death. Welcome, Bernice.
Thank you for having me.
I'd like to start by having you give us just a little bit more detail about your book.
Well, the Book of Harlan came about because I went to a book signing way back in 2003, and a gentleman had written and self-published a book called Germany's Black Holocaust, and that literally blew my mind because I had never heard of it. I wasn't taught it in school, and so it stuck with me, and I knew I wanted to write a book about it. And while the Book of Harlan covers it, it covers a whole lot of other history, but that I think is really the essence of the novel.
When we first meet your characters, we start actually with Harlan's parents, his mother Emma, where she grew up in Macon, Georgia.
Macon, Georgia.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about her childhood, because it wasn't typical of what you would expect of a child growing up in the South, an African American growing up in the South.
So I based that character on my own great-grandmother, and she had a privileged life because her father was a very well-known, very well-respected minister in Macon, Georgia. And so everything that you read about that family in the Book of Harlan is actually true. I researched that.
Okay, interesting. Okay, and so Emma is grows up with education, music lessons.
Yes.
I mean, it definitely was not your typical.
Not the typical. I think obviously it wasn't a typical life, but I think it's just. I think that aspect of African American history, it's just unfortunately not focused on.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to show my readers that there were people of color who had privilege during that time.
Right. Emma is described as kind of not wanting for anything, but that is meant really in a sense of food on the table, education, privilege, that kind of thing. But she is not feeling satisfied, is she?
No, she's not. She's got she has a wandering soul, and Macon is just too small a place. She feels caged there. So she's eager to get out.
Yes, right. And she has a best friend named Lucille. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that friendship, because that continues for a good part of the women's lives?
Yes, Lucille was her best friend, and she was a singer. And early on in the book, Lucille receives a music contract, and she leaves Macon and she travels around the country. She comes back a changed person, and that's actually what Emma wanted for herself. She wanted to be Lucille,
because when she sees Lucille after Lucille has been away for a year, Lucille comes home for a visit. Lucille, she looks at Lucille and says, "Oh, you've changed a lot," and it seems very disturbed. But she's not really disturbed so much by the change, is she, as the fact that she's not Lucille.
She's not the one. So there's some level of envy there.
Yeah,
and she's disgusted by it because she doesn't see it as envy. We all can see that she is very jealous.
Yes. Sam, who is Harlan's father, he met Emma pretty soon after he moved to Macon. He had been in Kentucky, was it, prior to that?
Right.
Yes. Yep. Okay. He sees Emma from afar, but is a little bit reluctant to approach her. What does he end up? He has a kind of strategy, though. What does he do?
He goes to church. He goes to her father's church.
Yeah.
And he basically imposes himself onto her and gets into her head.
Yes.
And otherwise, she probably would not have paid him any sort of mind.
Right.
So she can't stop thinking about him.
Yeah.
So she starts seeking him out.
Right.
I think
right.
it was clever.
Yes, right. He keeps appearing but not making any contact.
Right.
So suddenly she's like, well, wait a minute,
Right.
he's supposed to be pursuing me. So she ends up sort of pursuing
Exactly. The
him.
tables get turned.
So they do start kind of seeing each other somewhat secretly. And then one night she goes to his house, goes up to his room, and 3 months later discovers that she's pregnant.
Right. Right.
She tells her parents about it, and of course they're devastated, as any parent would be. What's the primary focus of their concern? Are they worried because she's not going to go on to have the life they envisioned for her?
Absolutely.
Or do they feel she's marrying beneath herself?
Both of those things. Her father already had it in his head that she would be going to Howard University.
Yes.
And that she would probably marry a minister like himself. And Sam he's a carpenter. And so that's what gets the minister father to change his mind, because he's putting him down, and Sam says, well, wasn't Jesus a carpenter?
Yes,
Yeah.
right. Sam and Emma announced that they are leaving Macon and moving to Washington, D.C. By now, their son has been born, but he's really just an infant. Her mother, Louisa, suggests that they leave the baby with her. And she tells him it's not because she doesn't think that they can take care of him. Is that true?
She does not believe at all that they can take care of this child. She realizes that Emma is very flighty, and she's not willing to let her grandson grow up under those circumstances.
Yes, yeah. And she, and eventually, at first, Emma says, no, I won't leave him, but it doesn't take a whole lot of convincing, does it, to this?
Because she really doesn't. She's not prepared
she's a
to be a
teenager
mother.
herself, really.
Right.
And then they come home for their for the holidays. So I don't know, it's been a certain number of months,
Christmas,
6 months or so. Yeah, clearly broke and hungry too. Are they discouraged at all?
Emma's not. Sam is ready to come back.
Yeah.
And be safe and, go back to regular life.
Right.
But Emma is dead set on pursuing her dream of becoming famous like her best friend Lucille.
Yeah. Do you think if we could ask Emma at that point in her life how worried she was that she would be able to achieve her goals, what would she tell us at that point?
So she wasn't worried at all, because I think in some ways Emma is a little bit of who I am. So, I pursued my dream until the end. Yeah.
Right. Sometimes it's better not to have any doubt, because I think you just go forward as if something can happen and make it happen,
That's
right?
right.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Emma and Sam kind of move around, and one big stumbling block for Emma is that whenever she tries to make money with her music, she's a very talented pianist, but when she tries to get a job playing, what happens to her?
She freezes up.
Yeah.
So she was raised in the church, and that's where she played, and now she's, at these holes in the walls trying to play the popular music of the time. And she can't do it. She can't do it at all.
Yeah.
So it's almost as if God has taken her talent away from her.
Yeah.
As punishment.
And so even though she kind of, if we could ask her, she would say she's not worried. She feels like she's doing exactly what she's supposed to be. There's some part of her that must feel some guilt if she freezes up in that kind of a way.
Yeah, well, I think she's blaming it on her father.
Mm-hmm.
She's side-eyeing her father about this. She's like, you have something to do with this.
Right.
You have to blame someone.
Right, yes. And then her father dies in his sleep one night. And then this all happens early enough in the novel that we're not giving away, the plot. We know this early in the novel. Her father dies in his sleep one night, and Emma and Sam, of course, go home for the funeral. When they arrive home, Emma and Sam really takes them a minute to even recognize their son. He's really the only parents he's known are his grandparents, have really been his parents up until that point. Is Emma feeling guilty at that point?
I think they both are. They really are. And so she's away. Her son is being raised by her parents. Now her father is dead, and now this little boy, whom she loves, is not interested in having any sort of relationship with her because he felt abandoned.
And he's a bit afraid of her. I mean, she's really, both of his parents are strangers to him at that point.
Absolutely.
In fact, in losing his grandfather, he has lost the only actual father that he's known so far in his life.
Yes.
What would you say his primary emotion is at that point?
Well, he was very protective of his grandmother. So I think that's where his focus was during that part of the novel. He really could care less about his parents. He wanted to make sure that his grandmother was safe.
Yeah. I think he's also, you can correct me if you're wrong, but my impression is he's very concerned also for himself. What's going to happen to me now?
Yes, because they're whispering about taking him away.
Yeah.
And so, yes, he is concerned.
Yeah. And that's very typical of young children when they lose a parent, that their first emotion is, what's going to happen to me? Before they can even miss anyone. And I sort of saw his clinging to his grandmother partly as being protective, and then partly as, if I hold on to her, she won't go away, or I won't be taken away from her if I hold on tight enough, almost literally, because he's just a little boy then.
Right, absolutely.
So Emma and Sam then use the money. Her parents had been wealthy, as you mentioned before, and she inherited money when her dad died. So they use that money to go to Harlem to, she says that they're going to visit Lucille, who at that point is living in Harlem. But they end up buying a house with the money she inherited.
Yes.
And then they come back for Harlan.
Yes, they do.
Yeah, you want to tell us about that?
Sure. Well, he goes. He has a long talk with his grandmother. His grandmother says, we'll write and we'll visit with each other. You need to be with your parents.
Yeah.
He gets to Harlem, and it's a big shock because it's total opposite from little tiny Macon.
Right.
But he adjusts pretty quickly, and the people like him. He's his southern drawl. He's a very personable young man, and it's in Harlem that he discovers this talent for the guitar.
Yes.
His mother hoped that he would be a pianist like herself, but that wasn't his calling.
Right. But he definitely has musical talent. He around age 16, he announces that he is going to quit school and fulfill and work full time on his music career.
Right.
How does Emma take that?
She's thrilled. She's thrilled. Sam, however, is not, because he was hoping that Harlan would finish high school.
Sure.
And he would have been the first one in that line of Elliots to do so. But because Emma was unable to fulfill her dream of stardom, she's hoping to live vicariously through her son.
Yes. And it was interesting to read that sort of perspective, like that would be a parent's perspective, because immediately you think, oh no, you're not quitting school, I won't give you permission. But she was very supportive of his decision to do that. Lucille is still active in her own singing career, and takes him on as one of the members of her orchestra or band. But then, and on one of those trips, he takes his first trip since childhood outside of New York. What's that experience like? Because part of his travels takes the group to the Jim Crow South.
Yes, so because he had been living this life as a young man in New York, he had basically completely mentally and emotionally separated himself from the ways of the South and had forgotten that the South was very different from living in the North. So when they get down into, I believe it's Georgia or North Carolina, all of the hotels, the black-owned inns, are booked, and they have to sleep on the bus. And he said, well, I saw a shingle in front of this inn. And he said, vacancy, why can't we sleep there? And Lucille has to remind him, she's like, black people can't sleep in those places. So it's a shock to the system. But he's also educated while he's out on the road. I mean, he loses his virginity, he starts to drink, he starts to smoke. So he basically grows up in those few months that they're traveling.
He also smokes marijuana for the first time. What is that experience like for him? Because it's kind of the start of a bit of an addiction that gets him into trouble.
Yeah, it is. He's not thrilled with it at first, but the more he does it, the more he enjoys it. And he thinks that it's kind of like one of the steps to becoming what he believes to be is a real man and a real musician, because all of the musicians smoke it, and it makes them, so they claim, it makes them play better.
In his case too, you know, he's really, the book doesn't sort of focus on this, but as the reader you get you understand that he's been through some pretty major trauma in his life, being separated, you know, being suddenly taken from the only parents he knew to people who were strangers, who really didn't know how to be parents for quite a long time. I mean, they didn't really know him until he was 4 or 5 years old. And then there was a very traumatic episode that he witnessed when the sister of a friend killed herself. He kind of uses the marijuana as self-medication too, doesn't he?
Yes, he does.
Yeah.
Yes, he does. I mean, and that's the way of addiction.
Yes. As well, and so he eventually starts drinking a lot.
Yes, Scotch. He's a dark liquor man.
Yeah.
And he starts womanizing.
Yes, and he gets himself fired over it too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, Lucille, she loves him like a son, but he violates her friendship one too many times.
Yeah, showing up late and not showing a sense of appreciation really for what she's done for him.
And she believes he's really not that good of a guitarist.
Let's talk a little bit, sort of back off from the story itself for a minute and talk a little bit about the writing of this book. As you started to mention, you know, when the show started, you wanted to have a book cover the Holocaust in the fact that black people were arrested in Germany and France and throughout Europe and put in concentration camps as well. So can you give us a little more detail about how you found out about that? Because I was unaware of it too until I read your book.
Right, so when I read Germany's Black Holocaust, that's where I found out about it. And then there was this singer, musician named Valeda Snow. And she was actually snatched off the street corner in Belgium, I believe, and thrown into a concentration camp for a year. When she was finally released and returned to the U.S., the white newspaper said that she was lying, that she was an addict and she had been jailed over in Europe.
Oh, goodness.
And the black newspaper saying, no, that's not what she's saying. She's saying she was in a concentration camp.
Right.
And so all of that piqued my interest. And I said, well, here's a story that I think we all should know about, and we don't. I believe 11 million lives were lost during the Holocaust. So there's 11 million different stories, and they all weren't of Jewish descent.
Right.
And so what about all the homosexuals, you know, the Jehovah's Witnesses, the gypsies? Those are all stories that I think need to be explored.
Right, I agree, yeah. Your discovery of the atrocities, you know, in your book, happens in Paris, when he's in the neighborhood where he goes to the Montmartre neighborhood where there's a music scene. But prior to that, it sounds like he was having kind of a great time. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that neighborhood and what your research told you about the music scene at the time?
Yes, they called that neighborhood the Harlem of Paris. And so all the black musicians from America would go over there and they'd perform for the Parisians. And it was just a really interesting, eclectic neighborhood, very welcoming. The musicians felt embraced. They didn't have to deal with any of the hatred and bigotry that they were dealing with here in the States. And so a lot of them made that particular neighborhood their home, or home away from home.
Sure. Yeah. Also, I read that your book, the main character for your book, was sort of drawn from the character of your grandfather.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you want to tell us a little bit about him?
Yeah. So it's his face that graces the cover, and this is my paternal grandfather. So my father didn't know him, and whatever my grandmother told him was little to nothing, and mostly lies because she was hurt. And so I started researching his life over 20 years ago. When I decided to write the book, I wasn't really clear on who the main character should be. And I started, trying to piece together someone, and I realized, I said, well, I have this whole history, my grandfather's history. So a lot of what goes on in the Book of Harlan is true, not about him going to Europe, but growing up in Harlem, moving to New Jersey, being arrested for various things. And I think that he's a very intriguing individual, my grandfather.
What are some of the facts that made it into your fiction from his life or from your family history?
Some of the facts that made it in. Well, he was arrested for dealing drugs, and he went to jail for that. He was a musician. He played the guitar. He was part of a band. He did live in Harlem, and he did move to Trenton, New Jersey in the 40s. And I believe there was, just based on some of the information that I've come across, I believe there was a touch of mental illness. But I've not delved really deep into that part yet.
Hard to get. And he also had a child that he didn't really ever end up knowing, right?
So he married my grandmother, and my uncle was born July 22nd, 1941. And my grandmother got pregnant again immediately, and my father was born a year later to the day. So, but by the time my father was born, my grandfather had abandoned the family. So your father never even really met him? Never met him? Never met him.
What parallels do you feel can be drawn from the era that you wrote in, which, like I said, around just after World War I and going through World War II era of the 1900s, some of the issues raised in there, do you feel that there are any parallels you can draw to contemporary issues that we deal with now?
Well, absolutely. Black Lives Matter. I write about the 1967-68 riots. It's no different than what's been happening here over the past few years, whereas black men were being shot in the street by police officers. The police officers weren't being indicted for these murders. And so it was weird working on the book while it was, happening in real time. So I think that's probably the strongest parallel.
Yes. The issues too that your characters are dealing with in terms of, you don't, I mean, they're growing up in a neighborhood where we're not seeing firsthand a lot of prejudice, but it's definitely there, and I felt that was a very good parallel to contemporary times when prejudice is not as overt now, but we can't say we're where we want to be yet.
Right. I think it just depends where you live. Because some places here in the States it's very overt. I've had incidents in New Orleans where I live now. It's not hidden. But when my grandparents moved, or great-grandparents moved to Trenton, New Jersey, the neighborhood was shifting, like a lot of neighborhoods are shifting now, but it was going from white to black. I think now it's starting to go from black to white. So it's secular.
Yes.
The only thing that changes is time, right? Time is constant. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. In writing this book, what did you feel was the primary issue you wanted to explore? Was it the what happened in the Holocaust, or was there sort of another theme that you wanted to explore?
That was certainly the impetus for the book. All the story that surrounds that built up around it, but I knew that I needed to have that particular incident in the book. So everything else came about very holistically. I don't sit and chart from the first page to the last page how the story is going to unfold. I allow it to just unfold in any way it feels
as you're writing.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I'm always interested in those kind of, what is the fact that made it into the fiction? What's the, what parts of the book are pure fiction? What characters? But you have some historical people in this book as well.
Oh, many historical people, and I love the exchange that happens between factual characters and fictional characters.
It's almost a way to bring them back to life. How many times it's happened that I've thought, I wish I could just have that person for 1 minute, and you get to do that in fiction, don't you?
I love that.
Yes. We have Louis Armstrong meeting the young musicians.
Louis Armstrong, Lucille Hegeman is a true character. There's a host of characters that are factual in this. So I give the list at the back of the book. If any reader is interested in researching further, they have the information.
It must be hard for you to decide who to include when you're doing a work of fiction.
Yeah, a lot of people get edited out.
Oh, really? Okay, so there were more. That can happen, yes. Well, I want to thank you for being with us today. To our viewers, you have been watching Behind the Pages from the staff of 22 City View. I'm Diane Goshgarian. And thank you so much for being here.
This was wonderful.
Yes, it was a great interview.
I'm glad you enjoyed the book.
Yes, definitely.